With us tonight are Judy Donegan, Thaddeus Paul Hamus, and Daniel Thomas. Welcome all. In opening the discussion, I'd like to first look at each position in the ideological divide over the immigration issue. So maybe with an understanding of how people think about immigration, we could construct some ideas which may help. One position is that we can't let any foreigners in because the lazy ones just want to get on welfare, get their kids a free education along with free meals at school, which the American taxpayer has to finance. Those who don't go straight to the welfare office will seek employment and take jobs from American workers because they'll accept less wages. And that means the unemployment rate for American citizens goes up. Immigrants are also likely to engage in criminal conduct, which represents another huge financial burden to the taxpayer with the costs to the criminal justice system. That's one position. On the other side, immigrants come to America in hopes of a better life. And by taking jobs and starting businesses that Americans can't or won't do, they contribute mightily to the economy by paying taxes, buying goods and services that support American companies that Americans work for. Also, statistics show that after getting into the country, they are less likely to do anything illegal for fear that arrest could lead to deportation. Also, one can argue that a more culturally diverse population makes our society stronger. Can you think of any other points on either side of the argument that should be included in describing the pros and cons of the immigration issue? Thaddeus, what else do people say about immigration that I missed here with my introduction?
Well, I think you got an awful lot of what I hear from the right about complaining about immigration. And, the only thing that I can address that with is they're making a lot of allegations here without giving us any evidence, but that seems to be
that's the way they do things, though, isn't it?
It is. It's kind of normal. So when you get right down to it, the only thing that I would want to add to it, and we could just spend the whole evening elaborating on what newcomers contribute to our society. You already mentioned, they start businesses, they take jobs that other people won't take, they pay taxes, so they're adding to the GNP, but also they bring in their cultural differences that add quite a lot to just the social fabric of our country. Take a look at all the hundreds of different kinds of cuisines that we have from all the people that have come from all over the world. Any city of any size, just eating can be an adventure any night of the week because of the people who have come from other countries and plied their trade as cooks to feed the masses here. That's just one little thing. But, we have the arts that they bring with them, the music, the dance, the drama, all of this stuff comes with them when they come over here on the boat. So that's one of the things that makes America richer, not just in money, but it makes it a more entertaining place. It makes it a more intellectually stimulating place to be. It's one of the things that makes America arguably one of the great countries to live in the world. So that's the side I want to be on.
Okay, Judy, did I miss anything that you could think of and that Thaddeus added to?
Well, I was really interested in what Thaddeus said, particularly about food and cultural advantages that they bring. I think that arguments to the people who are simply opposed without thinking and adding any kind of intellectual argument doesn't do much good. But for some people, there might be a fairness argument. There are things that, just reading about this, that I learned that I didn't know, and that is that green card holders come legally, of course, and they can bring their families legally. But when their children reach 21, unless they have obtained legal status themselves, they can be deported, even though they came legally. So they've sort of aged out of that system. So I think for some people, not the people who don't listen to facts, but to other people, the fairness argument might have some bearing on things. And also, I have seen articles that indicate that in the future, instead of trying to prevent immigration, there may be competition for highly skilled immigrants, particularly Japan, with its population decline, maybe competing for immigrants. I mean, maybe get the big old American spirit of we can win by saying that we need to compete to get high level or all immigrants, actually. Other than that.
Dan, Judy mentioned about green card holders, and I was just wondering, what qualifies somebody, a migrant coming to America, to get a green card? Because obviously everybody doesn't get a green card. Some do. Do you know anything about that?
Well, in order to get a green card, you have to apply for permanent resident status. And as a means to curtail immigration, I think we have slowed down the State Department's ability to process those applications.
Can I ask you, do those applications come before they enter the country?
Yes. 100%. You are applying before you get here for permission to come here, unless you've arrived as, say, a refugee or an asylee, in which case you can apply at the border. Well, if you come as a refugee, you were approved to come before you left your country of origin. If you were arrived as an asylee, you can claim that as soon as you enter the United States. You can request asylum. So if those are granted, you can get a green card, which are not actually green, by the way. They look like driver's licenses, but originally they were physically colored green. It's not that we don't like all immigrants, but this comes up repeatedly over and over and over again, depending on who's showing up. So in the 1800s, we didn't like Irish people. In the early 1900s, we didn't like Italian people and the Southern Europeans who were showing up. Today, we don't like the Latino people who are showing up. It's just an expanded sense of tribalism. But we have to have immigration into the United States in order to keep our economy functioning, because we don't make it easy to replace our aging population. Every other article is millennials are waiting longer and longer to have kids because they can't afford them. So the only way that we're going to be able to continue functioning on the current paradigm is to let more people come here who are going to be able to replace the workers who are aging out of the system.
I want to add one more point that I left out about the businesses started by immigrants. Moderna, the vaccine manufacturer, was a company started by immigrants. Okay.
Hold it, what the hell is that shit?
Since the Alien and Sedition Acts of the John Adams presidency, there has been a number of laws that addressed immigration. Before 1965, the big civil rights year, every piece of federal legislation had racial restrictions written right into the text. The two groups most targeted were the Chinese and African immigrants. After 1965, I guess they felt guilty at that point. Immigration laws that came from Congress contained no language regarding restrictions because of race. Did racial discrimination of migrants end in 1965, or was it just expressed in other ways? What do you think about that, Dan? Racial discrimination of migrants. Did it end in 1965?
No racial discrimination ended in 1965. We just stopped saying it out loud.
There you go.
But we started again with Trump. He started saying it out loud again.
He started saying it out loud.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that really goes into a later question, which we're talking about executive orders as opposed to legislation that came from Congress. Okay, so is there any other examples besides Trump of how it was expressed?
Well, we were talked about green card holders. There's a country quota on, there are 140,000 green cards allotted each year, not that they're all granted, but only 7% can come from any country. So that has led to discrimination basically against Chinese and Indians. Many more apply than can get admitted to the country. And then the Title 42 expulsions, which are based on alleged CDC statement that you can expel or not allow into the country people who might be carrying disease. And that's generally, of course, now in the time of COVID, that has been revived. And
revived by the Biden administration, initiated by the Trump administration.
Yeah, well, that's what I meant. The Trump,
okay.
Biden is still continuing to do it, however, but that falls most heavily on people coming in from the southern border, which would be Hispanics and Haitians. So there are other ways that the laws fall against racial lines, and perhaps are intended to.
I think Dan's just right on the money there when he says we don't just say it anymore. We do it, but we don't say that we're doing it. Okay, my recollection of the past decade is that immigration wasn't a high priority issue for most Americans until Trump's escalator ride speech put it front and center, where Mexicans were rapists, etc. Even after 9/11, Islamic terrorism was more of a vetting issue than an immigration issue. Was Trump's constant harping about the dangers posed by Mexicans at the border the main reason immigration leaped over other concerns to become such a big thing to worry about? Or were there other factors that made it such a big deal? What were the other factors? I didn't think that immigration was such a major concern for the American population, the American voters, until that escalator ride. And then it was like the only thing anybody ever talked about, the wall and all that. Judy, was there anything else that caused this to be a big deal, or was it just Trump?
Well, it's Trump capitalizing on the underlying hate and fear that might already have been there. It wouldn't have worked. His ride down the escalator and his statements about Mexican rapists and so on, if there wasn't sort of an underlying feeling, not expressed at the time, as Dan said, but an underlying feeling of fear or something against those immigrants. So it was Trump capitalizing on some latent fear or attitude that was already there, in my opinion. It wouldn't have worked otherwise.
Okay, it was there. People just were afraid to speak out until Trump kind of like gave them license to do so.
They gave him a green light. And I think we knew better before that. We knew we weren't supposed to speak in racial epithets, but he gave it a green light.
Dan, Trump gave it a green light, but it was already there.
It was all racial resentments and tribalism are already there, and I feel like they are. I feel like in-group membership and family clan allegiance and tribalism in general are evolutionary tools that helped humanity do as well as it did for a really long time. In this more enlightened era, we understand there were extremely high costs to those adaptations, but we still have them. So I think Trump just took advantage of them. But I also feel like, and then you might find this a little off topic, the right wags the dog because the right has no interest in actually governing. So they need to find topics of grievance, and critical race theory, immigration, pretty much anything with gender identity. These are things that don't affect them at all, but they use to stoke fears in an aging white, usually male population, and they just go with it. So they manufactured a crisis to ensure that people would be afraid and angry about something or other, and it worked. Now, I'm not saying we don't have a real humanitarian crisis at the border right now. And I'm not saying that we haven't had a real humanitarian crisis at the border for a long time. But Americans are real good at ignoring humanitarian crises and genocides and wars and famines and all that stuff if it doesn't directly impact us. And for most of us, it does not directly impact us. So I think that Trump pointed it out and said, that's bad and you should go do something about it. And the people followed Der Fuhrer.
So they basically wanted something to hate, and that was just a convenient thing to hate.
It was an easy target that they got pointed at, yes.
Okay. Thaddeus, what do you say about this particular aspect of it?
Well, of course, it starts out with Trump coming down on the escalator and telling the people who were just dying to have somebody to hate exactly what they wanted to hear in all caps. But before that happened, it's not just in society, but it's also written in our laws and has been since the get-go. The dirty little secret about American immigration is the lovely words of Emma Lazarus on the plaque at the foot of the Statue of Liberty. Do not enunciate American policy. It's what an awful lot of Americans, myself included, grew up through school thinking American policy was, that we are wide open to the huddled masses yearning to breathe free. And it ain't so, and it never was so. But what has gone to the extreme, from general misanthropy to psychotic xenophobia that we have now, is that the powers that be, particularly in the Trump era, took that general hatred of humanity and xenophobia and applied the existing American laws and the limits to immigration, the limits to how many people can come in and become citizens, and really push that. The worst part of that, I think, was the rhetoric that surrounded the influx of people at the southern border coming in without papers. And we heard time after time people on Fox News saying, they are criminals, they have committed a crime by entering this country. And the crime that they committed is a crime. It's a, what do you call it? It's a misdemeanor. As I recall, misdemeanors are like running red lights. it's not on a par with murder and rape and lying to Congress. And
Lying to Congress isn't a crime, Thaddeus. And
oh,
they've established that very clearly. You can get away with that, no question.
Lying to the FBI, supposed to be a crime,
but anyway, the exaggeration of the criminality of people entering without papers has been a big political thing, especially in the Trump era. And he's really made hay out of that because he personally does not like people who are not pink skinned. And the people who are coming from the South are generally kind of tan. So, he wants them out of here.
So the gist I'm getting is that it's always been there, but Trump kind of made it something that where people were prior ashamed of saying so for fear of being accused of being a bigot. Trump made it okay to hate this much. Okay, do you believe a path to citizenship should be made available to immigrants who cross the border illegally at any time during their lives? And if you do think these immigrants should qualify, what do you think immigrants should do to qualify for such consideration? We're going to talk about this later, but the Dreamers are a perfect example of that. They crossed the border illegally, and do you think a path to citizenship should be made available to them, Thad?
Yes. And the path to citizenship for everyone who crosses the border should be the same, except for one issue. If somebody crosses the border illegally, commits the terrible misdemeanor of crossing the border without papers, they need to pay the penalty of that crime. They have to spend their 30 days in jail or their 90 days in jail or pay a fine, whatever it is supposed to be. And I think that will be up to the individual judge each time. But once they have paid for their misdemeanor, they should be on a par with anyone else seeking citizenship or at least permanent residence in the country. No different.
Don't you think that position, though, would just open the floodgates? If they could just come across the border and spend 30 days in jail, and then all of a sudden, they're free to, wouldn't that be too overwhelming for the system?
Well, the system should be already be considerably beefed up from what it is now, just because there are people coming over the border. The fact that some of them have to go the extra step of paying for the misdemeanor of coming over the border without papers is notwithstanding. I like to think that we have space for more people in this country. And judging by what some people have said, especially employers who are hard up for people to do some of the lower level jobs that American-born people don't want to do.
I see help wanted signs everywhere. I mean, you can't go to any kind of retail outlet without seeing a help wanted sign.
Indeed, especially food service. You will not walk into a restaurant of any kind that doesn't have a help wanted sign in the window.
Yeah.
But that suffers very badly from a lower level of pay than just about any other trade. But people are. We need people. Our workforce needs people. So,
Dan, 30 days in jail if you cross the border illegally, and then you're free to go ahead and become a citizen or have a pathway to that, as Thaddeus suggests?
I'm not sure that that's not going to just become an invitation to open borders, and I'm not sure that our social safety nets here have the capacity to handle that. I don't want people to just be homeless. I don't want you to cross the border to just be homeless and eating out of a soup kitchen. I want people to have, if you're going to come here for a better life, I want you to have a better life. And I don't think that governmentally we have set up a system, and that's probably by design, where we could handle that big an influx of people. I'm also not all that keen on, even if it's just for 30 days, incarcerating thousands and thousands and thousands of people. That's a traumatic experience, and whatever caused them to pick up and leave with no money and no resources and walk here is probably that's just going to add to some enhanced trauma. I do think we need to come up with a better system. I don't know. I'm not an immigration expert. I don't know what that system is going to look like, but I don't think just opening to everyone who can sneak across the border, you get 30 days in jail and then goodbye and good luck. Welcome to the United States. I don't think that's the way to go. But we definitely need to come up with something more humane about doing it. I also think that the use of immigration and prison labor as answers to the labor shortage and the jobs that Americans don't want to do speak a lot to, like, there's big intersectionality here. Like, no restaurants can hire people because, yeah, I'm not going to risk catching COVID for $7.25 an hour. I don't know about the rest of you. It's really not okay to force immigrants who are already in a hard up situation to take those jobs for, you're not on paper because you can't legally work here, so here's $2, good luck. Because they'll take it because they're desperate. And that's, well, it's both illegal and immoral, but the web weaves closer and we see lots of different issues going on there. So using people in that way, the employers would definitely be taking advantage of them. I'm more in a position where I feel like the mighty job creators who hire immigrants who aren't allowed to be working here should be more strictly punished than, say, the immigrants. Like, you didn't see ICE raiding welfare offices on TV. You saw them raiding workplaces, and these weren't like small fly by night under the table places. These were like big commercial chicken processing plants and places where all of us nice white people with our middle class jobs and educations go and buy our food from. Like, oh, we are benefiting from the labor of the undocumented immigrants here. Maybe we should do something about getting them in, and maybe we should open a path to citizenship. But I would say the dreamers should just automatically become citizens. Like, you have dreamer status, go ahead. Well, welcome to the country. You came here. This is the only country you've ever known. You are as American as I am. You don't have any memory of being in Central America or Mexico or wherever you came from. You're grandfathered in. The adults, I'm not sure how to address that problem. It's a really complicated issue, but I think Thaddeus's solution might be a little too simple, and I don't think that we can handle it. As somebody who works in social services, I know what a giant influx of population does. And what you're talking about would create a sustained giant influx of population constantly that we do not have the manpower in any area of the government at present to handle. And I know in the Texas border towns, they are relying on private church groups, which I'm pretty sure should be illegal, even though it's obviously not. But they wouldn't be able to handle it either. Private charities will be stretched too thin, and government is already stretched too thin. I don't think that your solution will work.
Judy, we need to note that Thaddeus and Dan had disagreed on something, and that may be a first. But what do you think about pathway citizenship for people who cross the border? Do you agree with Thaddeus or Dan, or you have another opinion?
Well, I kind of thought your question was directed to people who have been here for quite a while and established a life here and are probably contributing members of society. And I think that those people should, without a doubt, just be allowed to stay. What's the harm in that? I agree. I think I agree with Thaddeus. You know, why don't we try it and see what would happen? But where I disagree with, or where I have concerns, is this misdemeanor punishment thing. How do we do that? This whole thing, to solve this problem correctly, is going to take a huge influx of money. If we're going to adjudicate asylum claims, I mean, the backlog of immigration cases right now is over 600,000 cases. I mean, as a person who used to work in a court, that just makes me want to lie down and rest. So we need a lot of resources to put into this, and I'm not terribly optimistic that we would do that. Part of me just wants to say that what we should require of immigrants is that they teach their children not to slam the door in the faces of other immigrants the way Ted Cruz does.
Okay. That's a tough issue there. Certainly.
That is just speak. He's not going to address you.
Go ahead, Thad.
There was another side of this question that occurred to me while Dan was talking, because he made some great points that I hadn't considered. But one that doesn't come up anywhere in this discussion is, what is the mighty United States doing about the situations in Central and South America that are driving people out of their homelands? I've been given to understand that in some cases, there are political unrests and criminality going on in some of those countries that the United States has contributed to. Has anyone looked at that?
Well, supposedly Vice President Harris has made that part of her mission to take a look at that. Last night on 60 Minutes, they just had an extensive part of their show. They're basically breaking up in 3 segments on Nicaragua and Daniel Ortega, and how that place has just become an authoritarian dictatorship, and anybody that goes against it is just, you know, thrown in jail and forgotten completely. But yeah, that's, you know, a very good point there, especially those 3 countries, Costa Rica, or maybe it's Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala, are big contributors to the problem.